Recently, I've been experimenting with some new techniques for ceramic jewelry making, so I'm going to show you a little bit behind the scenes of what I've been working on. So I am working with a device called an air pen. Now this is made for bakers, but you can also use it for ceramics and pottery, and I use it for underglazes. So I filled up these little vials with different Amaco Velvet underglazes. And what I'm going to do is create some custom underglaze transfers with this air pen, using it to trace a custom illustration that I made. I created this floral illustration on my iPad using the program Procreate, and I'm just taping it onto a little plastic lid because it's kind of windy outside, but I really wanted to work outside because it's so beautiful and sunny out. I've got my underglaze loaded up in the air pen, and now I'm going to put the little tip applicator on. I use a pretty fine tip so that I can get a nice thin line. I'm tracing the leaves and the stems with this pretty blue-green color, and I'm keeping that consistent across all the different illustrations. But I will be changing up the colors of the blossoms for a little variety and just to experiment a little bit. This is my very first time trying a custom underglaze transfer, so I don't know exactly how it's going to go, and I'm just making a small batch of work to test and see how the different colors come out and if it's something that I want to move forward with. I should mention that the kind of paper that I'm using here is called newsprint paper, and I was able to just print a PNG or JPEG of my illustration directly onto this type of paper from my printer at home. So that made it nice and easy to print out several copies of this design. It took me a little while to get used to the air pen, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to use. So there's a little hole where my index finger is, where air is coming out, and I cover that hole, and that squirts the underglaze out the tip. Once I got into my groove, I felt like I was using an adult coloring book or something. It's honestly kind of cathartic and relaxing. I've been in a little bit of a creative funk this year. I don't know what it is, but I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to come up with new ideas and make things that I think other people will like. With this, I don't know, I'm just letting myself play and try new things and have fun. With my ADHD brain, I think there's a little bit of a dopamine hit with trying something new and novel. So, yeah, I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but I'm happy to say that this project has helped me get out of my creative funk, so I'm feeling more like myself again. Changing the tubes on the air pen is really easy. And the kit comes with a few different caps so that you can safely seal your underglaze and keep them contained easily. So I'm putting on a red color right now, and I'm going to go ahead and trace my little flower blossoms now. I still feel like I'm trying to figure out who I am as an artist and what my style is sometimes, and I do struggle with imposter syndrome or not feeling like a true artist. But I think one of the reasons why I was so drawn to this technique of using my very own custom underglaze transfers is that I just love the idea of coming up with something that I drew and that came out of my imagination and being able to apply it to clay and make jewelry with it. Heading back into my studio, here's a little look into my colored clay drawer. This is where I store pre-mixed colored clay. I just use little sandwich baggies because I work with really small pieces of clay. And then these are the mason stains that I use to color the clay with. I have a number of different colors, mostly from Ceramic Supply Company and US Pigment Corporation. I'm starting off with a very small portion of this rusty red clay. I think the color that I used here was called Coral from US Pigment Corporation. And I just wrap it in a small piece of saran wrap before running it through my slab roller. I then use a yellow Mud Tools rib to smooth out that canvas texture. And then once I do that, I'm just going to set this little slab off to the side and begin my slip process. I have a number of pre-mixed porcelain slips using those same colors. I'm going to use a Celadon green, but I'm going to dilute it a little bit with plain porcelain slip just to lighten the color a bit. This color mixing process brings me back to the days of acrylic painting. I used to do a little bit of acrylic painting for fun, and I really loved the science of getting the colors exactly how I wanted them, so this brings me back to those days. Now I'm going to take that mixed color and paint it over the blossoms so that it fills in the little open spaces in that design. And the nice thing about this is it doesn't have to be perfect. I just layer it on, and I usually do a couple coats. Now I'm going to come in with some plain porcelain slip, and I'm going to add a couple coats over the whole design and that whole piece of newsprint paper. Once I've added a couple solid coats of that plain white porcelain slip, I come in with my heat gun and I give it a little zap just to dry it out a little bit. I don't want it to be too dry. I just want it to sort of be like a shiny satin sheen, and the edges kind of start to curl up a little bit when it's getting close. But again, it's a science. You don't want it to get too dry because we still want the design to be able to adhere to the clay. Time to put the transfer onto this little clay slab. I lay it slip side down onto this piece and press it down, and then I come in with a couple different tools to really secure it to that clay. I use a rolling pin, and then I also use a couple different ribs to really make sure it's adhering. I love this red rib from Mud Tools because it's kind of flexible and a little more gentle. After working it a bit, I'm going to go ahead and start to peel back that newsprint paper to reveal the design. So you can see that traced transfer and then the colored slip that I filled it in with on top of that white porcelain background. The process of peeling it is kind of delicate. If you go too fast, you could potentially rip little chunks out. So I really do take my time with this step. I would say this came out pretty nice. The lines look pretty crisp and I didn't lose too much when peeling off that newsprint paper. For these pieces, I'm just working with circle cutters. I lay down a piece of saran wrap on top of the slab so that my clay doesn't get stuck in the cutters. And then I just go through and do my best to punch out well-balanced parts of the design. Once I have all of the circles cut out, I like to smooth the edges using a Mud Tools smoothing sponge. You can also use a metal rib that also works pretty well for smoothing edges. Now it's time to add high fire wire hooks. I'm going to add a hook on the top of each piece and also on the bottom of it because I want to add little corresponding beads to each of these using that same clay body color. So here I am making the little beads. I experimented with a couple different size beads. This piece was a little on the larger side, which ended up looking really nice. And then I also experimented with a slightly smaller bead, which I think I'll probably go with because they're lighter weight and I think, a little better balanced on this set of earrings. This yellow bead is a little bit smaller, so just rolling that out, and then I make it into a teardrop shape just by compressing one of the sides a little bit. And this yellow color will correspond with a batch that I made using that as the clay body color. Time to load the kiln for a bisque firing. I can lay all of these pieces directly on the shelf because they do not have any glaze on them. This is a really small load of work, but I'm just doing a little test here, so that is why I'm not filling things up too much. Once the bisque firing is complete, I'm going to go ahead and glaze all of the flat pieces with a couple coats of clear glaze on the tops. I will leave the backs of these unglazed. I actually really like a raw, unglazed back, and it makes it a lot easier for firing in the kiln because I could just lay them right on the shelf. Here's my little collection of beads. So for these beads, I'm just going to clear glaze the very tips of them because I'm then going to add gold luster on top of that glaze. So the upper part will be raw, and then the lower part, like I said, will be shiny gold. time to load everything back up and head out to the kiln again for a glaze firing. Now that the pieces have been glazed, I can move on to one of the final steps, which is adding gold luster. So I use Western Glaze Company Gold Luster. I actually have a video of how I use this and how I fire it, because it did take a little bit of troubleshooting. But I apply a very thin layer to the ends of these beads, and then I'm also going to make small little speckles of gold luster on the flat pieces too, so that there's some cohesiveness between the different pieces. I'm loading the kiln up for the third and final time with the gold luster applied, and then once they're out of here, I'll be able to begin assembly. Fresh out of the kiln, here are all the pieces. It was so cool to see them in their final form. Definitely interesting to experiment with these different colors and get a feel for which ones I liked, which ones I might leave behind. But one thing is for sure, gold luster always adds a very special touch to everything I make. Here I am assembling one of these dangly designs with that flat illustrated piece and a little hanging bead on the end. Here's a glimpse at all the assembled pieces in this test batch. Overall, I'm really happy with how things turned out, and I'm really excited about this technique. It was fun to try on the different pairs, and I'm excited to wear them out. Let me know what you think. Do you like this technique? Is it something you would ever try? I think I'm definitely gonna do more pairs like this for some upcoming markets and for my website. Overall, I really enjoyed playing around with the air pen and experimenting with colors and using my own illustrations. So I'm glad I got a chance to try it out.